Hello, my name is Aiden.
And I'm Georgina.
My name is Chandler.
And you're listening to Occultism with a Side of Salt. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the complexity and the intricacies of deityship, and how people are working with deities in a problematic way that's misleading, confusing, and what does it actually mean to have a relationship with spirits, deities, entities, and everything, because I feel like this topic is something that's so broad and that there's so much misinformation out there about and so much discourse about.
I think the first place to start out would be the whole notion that's started coming up recently of being claimed by your deity, or how to find your deity, or your deity this, your deity that. And I think in general a lot of people are getting that from places like Tumblr, TikTok, and a lot of the more modern sources of information, quote unquote. And I think it's just a really poor conception of how paganism works as a whole, because you aren't chosen. It's not Percy Jackson. You aren't chosen by your deity. You are. If you look at how the ancient people worshipped, they didn't wait for some deity to choose them. They chose to work with who best suited them. And that's another thing as well. Who best suits you is going to be different for everyone. It's not going to be one person works with Inanna, so you should work with Inanna. You might work with Aphrodite instead, because they are different aspects.
Yeah, I think that I just hate when I see people, and I'm scrolling through TikTok, which honestly, I don't know why I still have TikTok on my phone. Every time I go on TikTok, I just get really angry, and then just look through pretty women dancing, and then calm myself down, and then just delete the app for the ninth time, and then re-download it. It's very masochistic. But I see all these videos about, they're like, I saw a crow in the road. What does this mean? I'm going to use my pendulum or tarot and figure out what deity has chosen me or contacted me, or if I'm talking to new practitioners, because all three of us are very involved with online forums and servers where we speak with beginners a lot, and we have a lot of these conversations all the time. I see people going, well, how do I know which deity is mine? What tarot spreads can I use? Which, first of all, if you're going to do a tarot spread to see what deity works for you, wants to work with you, that's probably not going to work. Or it's going to be confusing, because sure, you could pull a card like the sun, which then could lead you to any number of solar deities across every single religion in history, or you could get a more random card, like Four of Cups, and if you're a new practitioner, you're not going to know how to get that information. And the fact that tarot comes mostly from the subconscious, or if you're directly channeling a deity into the cards or something, it's not like you're going to pull a card and it's going to tell you, I am being contacted by Serranos. That's just not, that doesn't make sense to me. And when it comes to signs or looking for things out in nature, things happen all the time. And when you're looking for signs, typically if it's a sign, you're going to instinctively know, or it's going to be hitting you over the head again and again and again. You're not going to be sitting there for 3 hours trying to figure out every single thing that happened during your day and how this represents what, because that's just kind of a pointless waste of time process, because I just think a lot of this, and this is me getting a little conspiracy theorist, so call me out if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of this being chosen or waiting for signs thing is very passive and a way to avoid making direct action. Because I think people would rather wait for something to come to them than actually just invoke a spirit, right? That's a lot scarier, that's a lot more confrontational. It feels like there's a higher risk associated, but I don't know, I feel like it's this fear of actually putting in work and pushing yourself out of there that really informs a lot of these actions. And I think the fact that you see it everywhere and you see it so commonly, people have gotten this fantastical fiction notion that you're just chosen. I just think it's misleading, and it's not going to get you a solid answer unless you're really, really fabricating and pulling at strings.
Absolutely. I haven't had any deity choose me, and I work with several. The only time I've had any call out to me it was honestly not really them calling out to me directly. It was through various signs, as you would call them, that it's really all subconscious, really. It all comes from the subconscious.
Thinking of something a lot, or it sticks out in your head because of mythology or whatever, that's probably because the stories and the aspects of the deity address one of your deep fundamental needs and you're reaching out to them because it fills that gap. Like, for me, I was a disorganized mess who was obsessed with control and wanted to get my shit together, but felt like I couldn't. And so, of course, when I read stories about Saturn, I'm going to feel very drawn to that. Do I think that means I was chosen? No, I think that means that I saw a figure that could address one of my needs, and I was very pulled to that direction. Then when I made a connection, I got a lot of signs demonstrating reciprocity. Does that make sense?
I think people get so hung up on the idea of signs and looking way too deep into symbolism. Like, I have people who are like, oh my gosh, I saw a bird came to me. Does that mean that, like, freaking Venus is trying to talk to me? Probably not. I think people overanalyze the mundane way too much. Like, there's nothing wrong with something being a mundane experience.
I think as well as overanalyzing mundane experiences, they take the mundane, or I've seen this trend a lot. This really weird trend where people have taken this deity, right? They if not finding themselves to be like kind of chosen, they find themselves to be almost in this best friendship, or this like this weird like scenario where you'll hear people saying like, oh, I'm having my coffee with my deity, like I'm having my coffee with Apollo, or I'm having my tea with Aphrodite, things like that. And I find that to be really odd that you would have this like demeanor of having essentially something that's supposed to be power over you, or someone you were supposed to have high respects for, and pull them down and just make them like a common person you would act like you're like best friends with.
Yeah, I think it's weird because, like, when you're talking about a god, you're talking about a spirit that's been deified in temples, has a great canon of ritual behind them, and has vast powers if you believe in polytheistic spirituality, or even a more monotheistic spirituality where you see all these things as lesser spirits. Like, you see a lot of power and a lot of control and a lot of things that they're doing, right? And so I feel like it's very almost disrespectful to take a ton of their time out for something that's pointless.
It's absolutely disrespectful, and like, I don't understand where this idea comes from, that you can go shopping with your deity. Like, I can't imagine going shopping with Babylon. That'd be insane. You can't
Shop you can go with Babylon as Agent Provocateur.
Yes. You can't go shopping with your deity. You can't go drinking tea with your deity. You can have experiences with the deity. You can have deep religious, spiritual, etc. experiences with the deity. But I wouldn't really say that they take the time out. They don't really take the time to have these more mundane, random experiences with you. Like, unless you're like going to Michael's and invoking Apollo or something.
Which, if you want to stand in Michael's and invoke Apollo and possibly get arrested for distracting the peace, I mean, fucking go for it. But otherwise, I don't know why Apollo's chilling in Michael's with you.
I mean, at the end of the day, like, it's gonna make me sound old and like boomery, but like, have some respect. Like, does that sound like, does this all sounds like very like, it sounds like you're just treating your gods and goddesses as or deities you would work with, which to bring up the fact we've said, like, these are all aspects, so these deities are all certain things that connect to one bigger power. One we see a lot of correlation with the planets, and working with that certain deity is working with that aspect. So to like sit there and humanize like the aspect of like, say, Aphrodite through that aspect of Aphrodite, and sit there and just say like, I'm having coffee with beauty and vanity and like pride, and having this like just goddess you either revere or work with, and just like saying like, oh yeah, I'm just sitting at the table with that. Like, that's just like, it's odd. It's odd to think about, or odd to say, because it doesn't really make sense. Like, it doesn't benefit you in any way.
Yeah, and it also decontextualizes these spirits, because they all have pretty specific agendas. And on agenda, I think that there's something that people fundamentally don't understand, and something that bugs me, especially, this applies less if you're a Christian or Jewish or something, but the idea with pagan gods is, and especially lesser spirits, is these spirits are doing, if they're doing things for you and making a change in your life, they have a reason to do that. They aren't just doing things because they're bored or because they want to. They aren't just giving you whatever you want and expecting nothing. When you work with a deity, you need to give something back, whether that's literal offerings or doing things that they would want done on Earth. Like, you need to give something back, otherwise why are they doing anything for you in the first place? Because while they don't have human concepts like morality or whatever, they don't just do shit. They aren't just slaves, you know what I mean? They have their own agendas and their own intentions. And I think when you work with something, you should pay attention to what that is, and if they're doing big things for you, like getting you jobs, like, it's not free candy. You need to give something back. Whether that's physical or non-physical, there's still I don't want to say debt, because I'm not talking about pacts, but there's still an expectation. Like, they're not going to keep doing things for you for free for long. They're going to just disappear. Like, if I was someone who was with a friend and they just took a lot from me but never gave me anything, do you think I'm going to keep hanging out with them? Obviously not. The same goes for spirits.
I think that it is very transactional. I wouldn't say a debt, but I would say that it is definitely, when you enter that relationship and you're given something, or you offer something, you obviously offer something to expect something in return. So if something is given, then that relationship of ongoing, like, if you want to keep that relationship going, you want to keep offering and getting. And from the deity side, it would be the opposite of give and take. So it's one of those basic rules where if you work with something, it is something you enter a transaction with.
Yeah, these aren't just friends, and they aren't humans, and they don't have human concepts. And now this is something that we've talked about a little bit, is this, and I may edit this section out, depending on how it goes, but we've talked about people projecting LGBT identities onto deities and spirits. And all three of us have some affiliation to the LGBT community personally. But we all question, maybe not all, I know Chandler and I definitely feel this way, that the obsession with putting like gender and sexuality labels onto spirits, especially just general shapeshifter spirits, is strange and kind of questionable and a little revisionist.
It's definitely very revisionist, I'd say. In my opinion, the deities are spirits, and they don't have a set gender or sexuality. We perceive them as masculine, feminine, or neither in some cases, but that does not mean that they are actively that gender. That does not mean that they are actively that sexuality. In the myths, there are encounters where spirits, such as like Zeus, which people don't talk about because it's Zeus, but Zeus, Loki, Apollo, Dionysus, they all have same-sex, in quotations, partners. And that leads people into saying things like, oh, Apollo is bisexual.
But they're not people, so I don't think you can really even plaster these labels on them to begin with.
Exactly, they're not human. They can't have these labels. Bisexuality is a human construct. It's not a godly construct.
Yeah, because they're not physical beings. They're just not people. I think this big misconception comes from we're thinking they're people, but they're not. They're things that we can't even fully comprehend or fathom. They're beyond our understanding and beyond our perceptions. They're just beyond us, and we're underneath them, and as we are human, tethered strongly to this plane with no ability to escape it, besides brief trance-like experiences, we can't understand them completely, and we can't assume that we know everything about them. They're past our perception. We can see a taste of it, but we don't know everything, and pretending to and throwing like these labels onto them is just misunderstanding what they are.
Labels are human constructs at the end of the day, and we can't assign them to these greater spirits.
I want people to realize there is a written myth, right? There is a myth that has been written and adhered to, and these gods and goddesses, deities, whatever you want to call them, are all from a myth that was written a long time ago, and they were venerated, worshipped, and worked with a long time ago. These deities did not change, and the myth did not change due to any movie coming out or any piece of fiction coming out in the recent years. I've seen a lot of people adhere to and honor identities associated with different Nordic gods in the Marvel movies, and I don't know how I feel about it, because I don't think that it's accurate to what the god or goddess represents most of the time.
Yeah, I think it's legitimate to watch a film about a certain spirit or god that's depicted, like Good Omens or Avengers or Percy Jackson, and feel inspired and want to work with them. However, you need to do research outside of that and remember that that's fiction written 10 years ago and not the ancient myth. Like, if you are someone who becomes interested in the occult because of media or pop culture, like, that's fine and very common, but you need to do deeper research and know what you're doing before you actually commit to it, so that you know what you're actually getting into, because media, I actually work in media, creates a romanticized, sensationalized versions of things. It's not reality. It's an illusion, and it's taking something and transforming it. So even if it's real or based in myth, it's still a transformative work. It's like essentially mythology fan fiction. So you need to just remember to do research into the source material before you begin to work with it. Because I love pop culture. I love media. But you need to remember that it's sensationalized, it's romanticized, and it's always pushed to get an audience.
Absolutely. For me, whenever someone is talking to me about, like, hey, I'm interested in this because of this piece of fiction, I say, remove any pre-existing conceptions and just read the myths, because your pre-existing conceptions will definitely hamper your experience with working with these deities.
Absolutely. I think that gets into something that I see warping people's perception a lot of unverified personal gnosis, which is hearing the experiences of other people and taking that in, reading it, and having that kind of filter how you view something. Because I think that reading this stuff really helps, But when you're actually going to invoke, you're going to make contact in that moment, I think honestly even drop some of the myths like take that in beforehand and plan your ritual. But I think in the moment, you need to release everything you've heard and experience in the moment to get the fullest, most raw experience. Does that make sense? To not be thinking when you're actually going to work, well, this is a story I heard on TikTok and on a forum, so this is what's going to happen. I think you need to be like, okay, I'm working with a new spirit. I don't know how they're going to react to me. I don't know how this is going to go. And I'm ready to release my kind of anxieties about it and just throw myself completely into the experience, focus, completely solid, and just see what happens and experience it on my own, and then let my own gnosis combine, then after the fact, reflect on what I experienced combined with all the research I know, and then really process it and have that inform any later working you decide to do, or if you decide that this is just not the right thing to be tampering with and is not what your path is.
I think personal gnosis is a very valuable thing that every person needs to develop, but I also think that it shouldn't get in the way of how you experience, like, other people's personal gnosis, should not get in the way of how you experience a deity. Because one person's experience is going to be completely different from another person's experience.
Yeah, I think that's really important to keep in mind. And like some people I've talked to who I know are great occultists, and I've had different experiences and detected different kind of traits or sensations from the same spirit. And I think that that just connects with how I related to them. And I think that's fine. And I think that some people, especially a very controversial spirit, deity, demon that comes up a lot with this is Lilith. I have seen the most contradictory accounts, the most contradictory mythology to begin with, and the most contradictory accounts with Lilith, a spirit that a lot of beginner practitioners are very drawn towards. And I think that you should read all that information, because some people say she's, I've heard the term abortion goddess, I've heard the term mother figure, I've heard literally ruined my life and made me feel horrible, turned me gay. One person said that. I'm not saying that's going to happen. And a lot of really wild things. But I've heard a lot of extremely wild claims about people's experiences with Lilith. And they all contradict each other. And so for me, I'm not going to work with Lilith because I don't really feel a need to at all with my personality or things I need. But when you see a spirit like that, I think you need to not let what every other person ever has said and internalize that enough so it impacts your working. Though I think this also goes into another topic when I bring up Lilith, is people working with spirits or deities that are not applicable to their life and are way out of their personal maturity depths, which I could explain. Lilith is a very sexual entity. She's not really motherly. She's kind of not someone you should be working with if you're 14. And I think this carries on to a big thing that I've seen a lot with people who are minors, especially working with sex deities, drinking deities, trying to do the bacchanalia, and all these crazy things that are just not appropriate for the practitioner. Like someone will be like, I like having fun, so I'm going to venerate Dionysus, a literal god of orgies, booze, killing people in the woods, and a bunch of craziness.
Yeah, I have seen firsthand when I first joined TikTok, because I am an active user of, social medias, and I have seen this a lot whenever I first joined. This app, right? This app contains a lot of minors, right? It's heavy with kids. And a lot of these kids are seeing, I think it's some sort of media that depicts him as like a wine zaddy or something. And they see like, oh, Dionysus is like a zaddy or whatever. And they like venerate him, they worship him, and they worship that version of him, but they don't understand what they're worshiping is exactly what you described, a god heavily associated with like orgies and drinking and killing people in the woods. And it's just one of those things where it's this giant almost a cult has seemed to risen. I literally have seen someone on my FYP page that was like, if you're seeing this is a sign that Dionysus is calling out to you. By the way, no signs are on TikTok. I'm gonna let you know that right now. No signs are on TikTok. Yeah, there are no signs on TikTok. And this whole like cult of Dionysus, I don't think they really understand what they're forming or what they're doing. Like, I see people like are like, oh, I work with Dionysus, I'm going crazy, and I'm like, okay, welcome to my twisted mind part 2, I guess. Like,
yeah, it's like, it's this huge thing, and I don't think these people know about the historical cult of Dionysus, which, by the way, Dionysus was only put on the Olympic pantheon because the Greek government couldn't suppress the cult of Dionysus, so they needed to tame it down, because the cult of Dionysus was doing some interesting things. You can do your own history research after this. We're not trying to get demonetized. But, it's not what these people think. And they're like, and then I'm like wondering, like, are these kids gonna get hurt? Because when you work, or at least in my experience, when you work with an entity, you pick up some of their traits. You get, what you spend your energies around, which we talked about in our LHP and Love and Light episodes, permeate into you and sink into you. So, like, if you're working with Babylonian energies all the time, you're probably going to become more confident, way more sexual, more kind of attention-seeking. But if you're working with Dionysian energies, you're going to become, woo, crazy. But you're also going to want to do drugs, have sex in the woods, do very reckless things that are definitely not appropriate and good for a 13-year-old girl in quarantine. And it's just really concerning to me. I feel like I sound like a concerned mom, but it's worrying when you see people messing with things that they don't even comprehend without realizing that it's going to affect their life. Like, if you believe this stuff and you put in a bunch of intention towards this stuff, it's going to impact you. It's going to change you. And I think people should be really careful about who they spend their time around. Because your influences rub off on you, and if you don't know what you're doing and you're working with something without thinking about it, I think you could really get hurt.
I think that it's also careful to really know and study what you're doing. I see a lot of people work with Hecate because she is dubbed the Queen of Witchcraft.
So I'm a Hecate fanatic. I adore her. But in Hecate's mythology and in her workings, Hecate is not, the witchcraft thing actually isn't even her focus. Most of her mythology is basically her being a representation of the fringes of society, of the outsider, of trash, literal garbage. In the PGM, it says you need to put baboon shit in her incense. I'm dead serious. Like, she represents filth, garbage, rot, decay, wild dogs. And I don't mean, like, cute puppies. I mean, like, wild dogs. Like, and in her historic rituals, the priestesses would literally slit their wrist. Not, like, slit their wrist, but they would, like, bleed a ton on the altar. Which, if you work with her, you should give blood offerings. I'm just saying, but they would, like, bleed everywhere. The witchcraft wouldn't even really be a focus. It's just because witches are seen as outsiders and kind of dangerous, wild women that they got lumped into the Hecate camp. She's very chthonic, very, very chthonic. And her energy is she's dark. I mean, she's not, like, pure evil, but she's a dark spirit. She's got she's Titanic, you know what I mean? She's got this very feral kind of harshness to her and sternness. And she expects a lot from people who worship her. And if you just worship her because she's a witch queen and is related to the moon, which, by the way, she's related to the new moon, not the full, which is a huge difference. Her and Selene and Artemis are all moon goddesses from the same pantheon, but are radically different characters. you're gonna have a confusing experience, and you need to understand what a spirit is before you work with them. If you're gonna work with Hecate because she's a witch, you're gonna have a really weird experience when you realize that that's not even her primary function.
I find it odd. I really do. I find it to be quite reckless, really. Because no one really goes out and presents themselves as this person that works with deities for essentially. No one really presents themselves anymore in discussion whenever they're beginners as people who worship deities almost for like the right reasons. It almost feels like they're being told to. I've seen very few people come in and be like, oh, I work with this person or I work with this spirit because I like X, Y, and Z, or I venerate my or I'm venerating my ancestors to find my path right now, or something to that line. It's always like, oh, I work with Aphrodite because I'm a Libra, like stuff like that, and it's like, it just seems reckless to me. It seems like you're diving into something that you don't know. It's like, what if you just said one day, like, oh, I'm not a Christian anymore. I'm a Buddhist, without knowing anything about Buddhism. Like, it's very odd to just pick something and be like, yep, that's my God, like that's the divine power that I see over my life right now.
Yeah, and I see deity as being something when people begin their practice, they immediately go, I need a deity. Like, to practice this stuff, you don't need a deity. You can do a lot secularly or without, like, you can be pagan but not work directly with spirits. Like, I feel like this is something people feel obligated to do early on, or like, this is something I see a lot on books or YouTube, and they're like, okay, well, I need to pick something. I need to commit now. I need to find my patron within the first 3 weeks, which, by the way, I don't believe you should call anything your patron until you've worked with it for at least a year. And they're like, well, I need to do all this now. I see this discussed all over TikTok, so this is what I need to do first. Rather than thinking, like, really deeply about what they like to practice, learning to practice with only your own power, learning what you desire and what your goals even are with your practice. Like, when you get into this, you may not know immediately, but generally you should have some sort of goal or goals for your practice rather than just doing things with no purpose to it. Because things are going to work best when you have a goal or you have some sort of mental trajectory of where you want to go. And so I think when you begin, you should do a lot of reflection on what you actually want rather than going, these are the things I see people doing, so I need to do this little checklist. Like, I need to do the elements. I need to pick a deity week 1. I need to do a jar, or I need to learn what the Tree of Life means, but then never apply anything Kabbalistic to my practice. I think people need to think very pragmatically about what their goals are and make decisions of who to work with and what paths to follow based on a goal. And you don't need to know that immediately, but I think when you're making a huge decision with what you want to do, I think you should consider that. And you don't need to have all the answers, and of course you can always change your path. Always. You're never tied down to any one thing. You can always change. But I think you should always be conscious with the decisions you make, because this stuff, as I think we've all experienced at some point in our practice, makes a significant impact on your life.
Absolutely. This is not something that you should take lightly. I keep hearing this weird question of what are good starter deities, and my instinct response is there are none, or Charmander. Because
speaking of Charmander, oh god, are we actually... Okay, Chandler, we can have the Pokemon conversation. As much as I hate this conversation and it makes me want to quit this podcast and join a nunnery, Chandler, this is your moment. Let's talk about the Pokemon thing.
All right. I addressed this offhandedly in my own video, and I want to start this. I want to start with this. If you do these practices that I'm about to mention, I need you to understand that what you are doing is you are not deifying a character. You are not raising something to the status of something, but you are creating an idol for something that is already existing. But that idol is what you have identified with and what that is to you. So in a way, you really are deifying that. Now, there is an argument that has been said to us, and it is a mind-blowing argument.
I don't like it. I want to disclose that I don't like this practice.
It is, so there are many practices out there, and a popular one we have seen modern day is a practice called pop culture witchcraft. And pop culture witchcraft uses figures in the pop culture of today, or entertainment of today, such as animation or TV, any real entertainment or products that you identify with, and you take it and you assign a spirit to it and you idolize it. For instance, let's take Pikachu. Pikachu can be very representative of Zeus, which is a god of all gods, which could be representative of essentially Yahweh. And the fact that we could...
We're not talking with we have had a private discussion multiple times about how Pikachu is Yahweh, and I want to cry. Sorry.
And the fact...
I cry because it makes sense and I don't like it.
See, the fact that we can take Pikachu and assign it to him is because it's not the fact that you don't see Yahweh as Yahweh. It's the fact that you see Yahweh as Pikachu. That's what it is. And it's not, you aren't going to identify it as that, but other people will understand it as that. You will say, no, Pikachu is Pikachu, Pikachu is better than your god. But the end thought would be they are the same god, because they are, if they can answer the four questions, is Pikachu omnipresent? Is Pikachu all-knowing? Is Pikachu all-loving? And is Pikachu...
I think the big argument for this that I heard from someone is mythology was written by someone. Mythology didn't come out of the air. And so when you look at modern popular media, you can see that as modern mythology. Because all these characters and these personifications of energies is something that we constructed as a society. So when you look at media and you're looking at Pokemon or Harry Potter, and you see these spirits assigned values and assigned stories that have lessons, just like mythology, because mythology, when you read it, you're not supposed to literally interpret it. Sorry, Bible fundamentalists, you're supposed to take a meaning out of that and then understand some sort of religious understanding from it. You can see pop culture as modern mythology. And do I like that this makes sense? No, but it does, and people use these practices and they work. It's pop culture witchcraft, I think, is just another a later version of chaos magic in the end. I think that it's kind of just the same thing, but in a weird, more contemporary interpretation. I say as if chaos magic is traditional, but it's like the 2020 version of it.
I agree. I think that fundamentally they're the same.
And does that mean you have to do this? No. You can be like me and be a humorless fundamentalist, but you do have to accept that these concepts make philosophically just as much sense as venerating Loki because of stories someone came up with 2,000, 3,000 years ago. And I think that as much as these people may annoy you or seem absolutely batshit at first glance, we do need to respect that this practice does have basis. Because deities are just stories we've given names to and energies we've named and given human qualities to help us better understand them. Because in the end, I think what this whole episode turns around to is humans personify things to better relate to them. We assign these energies human characteristics to help us better contemplate the divine. We're just projecting to help us fathom something unfathomable. Like, in the end, I mean, we're just trying to understand the same question. Every culture, every history, every practice, we're seeking the same answers. And since there have been results in pretty much every practice, you have to recognize that there's some legitimacy in them, and for certain people, that is their truth. So when we create cosmologies, we create religions, we create stories and constructions and origin myths and apocalyptic fantasies, that's just us projecting what we understand based on our personal gnosis onto something we can't even begin to understand. Because I think in the end, these energies, these gods, these spirits are beyond human comprehension. We can get as close as we want, but we'll never fully grasp it. And I think that's kind of exciting and kind of scary. But I think that's something we need to recognize and remember, that we're just humans assigning characteristics to something beyond us. And so that's why we shouldn't try to bottle them down and turn them into people, because they're not. We've just personified them as gods and given them names to help us get it. Because I think we want to understand things that we can't really 100% understand.
I think at the end of the day, we're not going to be able to understand everything that we're doing, and I don't think we're going to be able to agree with everyone's practices. But we also need to recognize that there's a history to everything. There's legitimacy in everything. One of my favorite phrases is there's truth in everything. And we need to look into those older practices, and we also need to understand why we're doing these practices. Because if you can't answer the why, you're not going to be able to get very far. Because you can have the how, you can have everything else, but if you can't understand why you're doing something, then you're not going to get very far, which is why I think there should be more research done into deities by people who are just starting. Like, you shouldn't be asking other people to do the research for you. You should look into your own research with it.
I think that if you want to, hold on, let me restart, cut that. That sounds really robotic. I think that if you are looking to practice with a deity and you're unsure of what to do, I recommend you research and you look into a myth that interests you, or you look into lore of your land, and you look into the things that are already available around you. I think that if you are someone who is personifying your deities, I want you to take a moment, stop what you're doing, and ask yourself, why do I do this? What benefit does this give me? Do I want to continue doing this? And does my deity want to continue doing this? Do you think that what you're doing is beneficial to you, or do you think that it's wasting your energy? People would worship the sun or sun gods because they didn't know if the sun was going to rise. You know, it's not going to be one of those things where it's as easy as a like, oh, I want to do this, or like, this person is calling out to me. Like, it's not just like a like partner that you magically get. It is something that you can search for, because at the end of the day, deities are a small representation of something much larger that is attached to something larger in of itself, and you can believe that or believe something else. But if you don't understand that certain deities are worshipped or venerated for certain reasons, then you shouldn't be working with them in the first place. I recommend everyone go out and do research first and foremost, and deities are no exception. At the end of the day, if you want to boil it down to a small digestible piece, you can always say that deities are representative of archetypes, and those are archetypes we psychologically access in our brain, which to an extent is true. But if you believe in their embodiment and physicality in this realm, then that can alter your perception of that statement.
Well, this has been the episode. I hope you have an amazing night, day, afternoon, mid-morning, or whatever other time or non-existent time it is where you are. I've been Georgina.
I've been AIDEN.
And I'm Chandler.
And you've been listening to Occultism with a Side of Salt.